They always said I was the practical one. At Sunday dinner, back in that old white brick ranch in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the kind of house where casserole dishes were more permanent fixtures than furniture, I sat through the usual symphony of praise from my younger brother, Mason. He just landed another promotion in Nashville, something nebulous in commercial real estate, the kind of title that sounds impressive until you realize it means very little. My mother beamed, Dad nodded with feigned modesty, and I chewed my green beans like they owed me money. I'm 49 now. Name's Russell. I've run a modest contracting company since I was 26. Nothing flashy, just stable. I build things people live in. Mason sells things people pretend they can afford. Somehow, he's the success story. That dinner, it wasn't the flattery that bothered me. It was the segue. Right after dessert, banana pudding from Kroger, of course. Mom brought it up with that voice she uses when she's about to ask for something wrapped in guilt. She said they'd been talking as a family, which I already knew was code for "we've made a decision without you." They thought it'd make sense if I signed a quick waiver to transfer the old house, the one on Lake Como Drive, the one my grandmother left to me in her will, over to Mason. Their logic? He could utilize it better, whatever that meant. I didn't say a word, just nodded slowly and reached for another spoonful of pudding. I watched their faces, expectant, rehearsed. Mason barely looked up from his phone. That house wasn't just property to me. It was weekends spent fixing the porch with Granddad before his back gave out. It was where I learned to lay tile in the downstairs bathroom because the contractor canceled and Grandma said, "You got hands, don't you?" It was mine because she trusted me not to treat it like a payday. What none of them knew, what no one in that room realized, was that I hadn't just inherited that house. I'd spent the last 15 years buying up properties around the county, quietly, conservatively every time I finished a job, and there was a little extra. Rentals, duplexes, even a couple trailer lots that turned solid profit. I rolled them all under one LLC, Como Property Holdings. That house was the first title transferred into the LLC. Not last week, not last year, 9 years ago. So when I said nothing, when I just smiled and let them believe I was being difficult or selfish, I was giving them more grace than they ever gave me. The next morning, they showed up at my office with a lawyer. Mason walked in first, holding some printed document like it was going to convince me that blood trumped contracts. He said he thought we could sort this out quickly. I invited them in, offered coffee, and let them talk. And when the lawyer finally asked if I'd be willing to reassign the property in question, I opened the filing cabinet, slid over the property portfolio, and said, flat as drywall, "You're welcome to make your case to the company's legal department." They all stared. I watched the blood drain from Mason's face as he scanned the papers. Not just the Lake Como deed, but the other 47 properties beneath it, each stamped and sealed with my company's insignia. The lawyer asked if this was a joke. No, this was strategy. I excused myself, said I had a 10:30 walkthrough on a duplex in Powell. As I passed Mason in the doorway, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not angry, just confused. Like the rules of the game had been rewritten while he was busy posing for pictures in front of someone else's Porsche. But here's the part that still eats at me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Because all those years I spent being the dependable one, the one who fixed Mom's sink and paid Dad's overdue car insurance and gave Mason a short-term loan he never mentioned again. They weren't strategy. Not at first. I just didn't think I had a choice. It's strange what families choose to remember and what they erase. After that meeting in my office, things got real quiet. No follow-up calls. No, let's talk this over. Just the sound of distance widening. I guess they finally realized I wasn't bluffing, that I hadn't just stumbled into a little inheritance and lucked out. They thought they knew me. Practical Russell, the one who fixed gutters, brought potato salad to every potluck, and never made a fuss. But that's the thing about being invisible for long enough. Eventually, you start building a world no one else gets to see. The next week, I started getting texts from distant relatives. One of my cousins, Melissa, I think, sent a message asking why I was making a scene. Another uncle, who hadn't said more than 10 words to me since 2004, texted to say Mason was devastated and maybe I should be the bigger man. I didn't reply, not out of spite. I just didn't feel like justifying myself anymore. What no one seemed to realize was that this wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the story they had always told themselves, that Mason was the bright one, the one with potential, and I was just a placeholder. Reliable, predictable, the ghost who shows up, fixes things, and leaves. But ghosts remember everything. I remembered when I was 16 and Mason crashed Dad's car into the pharmacy parking lot sign, and somehow I was the one grounded. I remembered the Christmas he maxed out mom's credit card buying a girl a tennis bracelet, and she called it a phase. I remembered when he flunked out of his first semester at UT, and they made it my job to drive him to class when he enrolled at the local community college, even though I was holding down a full-time job and studying construction codes at night. Mason had been a walking liability for years, but they never let him fall, because falling meant facing who he really was. And me? I was the net. The worst part? I played along. For decades. Because part of me wanted to be seen. Just once. Not thanked, not rewarded, just acknowledged. But you can only hold your breath so long before it stops being patience and starts being self-erasure. That Sunday, a week after the lawyer stunt, I drove past the old house. Just parked across the street and sat in the truck with the engine running. I hadn't been back since Grandma passed, but the porch still had that rust stain in the corner, right where I'd set my toolbox every summer. The willow tree I'd planted within the year I turned 21 was still standing, swaying in the wind like it didn't know anything had changed. I saw Mason's car in the driveway, still washed and waxed by someone else like always. The lawn was overgrown. He'd never been one for yard work. And for a split second, I wondered if he even knew the water heater needed replacing. I could have gone up, knocked, said something clever, but instead I just sat there, watching, because he could live in that house. But he'd never own it. Not really. It didn't belong to the person with their name on the will. It belonged to the one who stayed when things broke. And he didn't even know where the breaker box was. I used to believe that silence meant peace. That if you just kept your head down, worked hard, and avoided conflict, people would eventually notice. Respect you. Maybe even love you in their quiet way. But silence can be a grave, too. The funny thing is, I didn't grow up resenting Mason. Not at first. We were just different. He was the kid who could talk his way out of anything, who smiled through every mess he made. I was the one who picked up the pieces, thinking that made me strong. It took me until my 40s to realize that's not strength. That's servitude dressed in family loyalty. After I shut the door on the whole sign the house over stunt, things unraveled quietly. Like watching a sweater come undone thread by thread. My parents stopped inviting me to dinner. I got a group text for my dad's birthday, a generic message with a party time and address, but no real invitation. I didn't go. They stopped trying after that. Then came the call from Aunt Carol. She's my mom's older sister, the only one in the family who ever saw through the golden child illusion. She didn't mince words. Said she heard some drama about the will and asked if I was okay. I laughed. Actually laughed. First time in weeks. That's when she dropped a bombshell I hadn't expected. Apparently, my parents had been quietly shopping around their own house, the one they still lived in, trying to find a buyer under the table. But the house wasn't just theirs. Years ago, when my father was between jobs and the bank threatened foreclosure, I stepped in, bought outright, put it in a trust. In my name, another secret they either forgot or assumed I'd never use. I didn't call them about it. I called the attorney who helped me set up the trust, a quiet old guy in Knoxville who always remembered my name and never asked questions. He confirmed it. The house was protected. If they wanted to sell it, they'd need my signature. They never asked for it. So I waited. 3 weeks later, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was brittle, tired. She said there had been a misunderstanding and that she hoped we could talk. I didn't return the call. The next day, Mason texted me again. Said he hoped I was done being dramatic. That's when it finally sank in. They weren't sorry. They weren't reflecting. They were circling back because they hit a wall. All those years I thought I was the quiet one, the forgettable one. Turns out I was the foundation. And when I stopped carrying them, the whole structure shook. But here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. If they had just asked, really asked, not expected, not guilt, I might have helped. I might have given Mason the house, or at least shared it. It was never about the property. It was about being treated like I didn't matter. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I've come to believe every family has a kind of emotional bookkeeping. Not just who did what, or who paid for what, but who mattered. Who got forgiven quickly, who got blamed slowly, who was expected to sacrifice, and who was protected from ever needing to. My name was never on the front page of that family ledger. Not even in pencil. Growing up, Mason broke things and got comforted. I fixed them and got ignored. When I bought my first truck at 22 with money I'd saved from summer roofing jobs and side gigs, my dad didn't say well done. He asked why I hadn't bought American. When Mason leased a brand new Mercedes he couldn't afford at 27, they threw him a surprise dinner at Chili's. I didn't grow bitter overnight. Bitterness, it turns out, is a slow build. It grows like mold in the quiet places, the moments where you bite your tongue instead of speaking up, when you let things slide because it's easier than being the problem. For years, I was the family handyman, accountant, moving crew, and emotional landfill. They vented to me when they were upset with each other. They asked me for help without apology. They never called just to say hello. And yet, I kept showing up. I don't even know why. Guilt, probably. Habit. The sick hope that maybe the next time I fixed something, they'd say thank you and mean it. Then came the tipping point. 3 weeks after the showdown with the lawyer, Mason posted a photo on social media. Him, standing in front of the Lake Como house, holding a glass of wine on the porch like some catalog ad for successful son returns home. The caption was simple. Good things come to those who wait. Waited for what exactly? While I was up to my elbows in septic issues and drywall dust, he was waiting. It felt like a slap. Not just because it was smug, though it absolutely was, but because he still didn't get it. Still thought the house was his in spirit, just because people kept telling him he deserved it. So I did something petty. Not proud of it, but I won't pretend otherwise. I sent a short, polite letter to the tenants renting the duplex across the street. Nice folks, a retired teacher and his wife, offering them a month of free rent if they'd kindly play bluegrass covers on their front lawn every Saturday morning at full volume. They laughed. Agreed instantly. 2 weeks in, Mason texted me. Do you know why the neighbors keep playing banjo music at 8 a.m.? It's getting obnoxious. I just responded, guess you should have read the neighborhood bylaws. Some of us don't mind a little Tennessee tradition. He never replied. Petty? Sure. Satisfying? In a way that years of swallowing my feelings never were. But that wasn't the real victory. The real win was finally seeing my value. Not through their eyes, but my own. Turns out, when you stop auditioning for love, you find out how little the applause was worth. I skipped Thanksgiving that year. First time in my life. No turkey, no gravy, no pretending I wasn't the only one setting the table, while Mason helped by pouring himself another drink. I stayed home, grilled a ribeye, and watched old westerns in my flannel pajama pants while the cold crept in through the windows of a house I owned in full. Around 9 p.m., a photo popped up in the family group chat. Mason at the head of the table. My parents on either side, raising glasses of white wine. My chair, the one I used to sit in every year next to Grandma's old buffet, was empty. No one said a word about it. That's the thing about absence. When it becomes routine, it stops raising eyebrows. But what they didn't know, what made me pause my movie and just stare at that photo for a long while, was at the table they were sitting at. That dining set, the antique hutch behind them, even the roof over their heads. All of it was mine. Years ago, when the financial walls started caving in on them, I quietly refinanced the house under my LLC, bundled it with 2 other struggling properties to secure a better rate, and never told them. They thought the bank had worked something out. They never asked questions. They didn't know that their wine glasses, their Thanksgiving meal, their safe little world was being held up by the son they forgot to thank. But here's where it really turned. A week after Thanksgiving, my mother called. Not texted, not emailed. She actually picked up the phone and dialed. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Said she was worried about the distance. That family doesn't always agree, but blood should mean something. I played it twice. Not once did she mention the will. Not once did she say my name. Just vague appeals to togetherness, like I'd accidentally missed dinner, instead of being deliberately erased. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I printed out a ledger, an actual physical one. Started going through every transaction my company had made on behalf of my family. Mortgage payments, utility bailouts, grocery reimbursements. I tallied up every favor, every gift, every time I covered for someone who forgot their wallet or had a tight month. The total was disgusting. But more than that, it was illuminating. I realized I'd been subsidizing not just their bills, but their entire version of reality. One where Mason succeeded on his own charm, and I was just the quiet, helpful backdrop. No more. So when Christmas came and the invite arrived, a cheerful little card in the mail, addressed to the Russell family. As if there were others, I sent one back. Same format, same tone, just one line inside. This year, I'm spending the holidays with people who know what I've given and never expected it. No one replied. They say people show you who they are in crisis. That's true. But sometimes what they show you is who you've been to them all along, once your usefulness runs dry. The day after New Year's, I got a knock at the door. Not a text, not a call, a knock. I looked through the peephole and felt that old, acidic mix of tired and amused rise in my chest. It was Mason, and behind him, standing awkwardly with a leather briefcase and forced smile, was the same lawyer who'd shown up months earlier to get me to sign away Grandma's house. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. Just leaned against the frame and waited. Mason cleared his throat and said they wanted to revisit the conversation. That now, with cooler heads, maybe I'd see the logic in reconsidering the ownership structure of a few properties for the sake of keeping things in the family. I didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't funny, but because it wasn't even surprising. The lawyer, poor guy, tried to hand me a thick folder full of new documents, freshly tabbed and labeled like that might impress me. His voice was carefully neutral, but I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't sure why Mason was here. He just wanted his retainer check to clear. I asked a single question. Have you reviewed the title records for Como Holdings? He said no, not personally. I told him to go do that. And when he did, to check the lien history, the trust protections, the internal charter. Because this time, I wasn't just the owner. I was the gate. They left quietly. Mason didn't even argue. He just looked deflated, like a kid who finally realized the candy jar had a lock. But what hit me wasn't triumph. It was this dull ache, a confirmation that they'd never once come back because they missed me. Only the assets. It was the last interaction I had with Mason for a long time. But something else happened that week. A tenant of mine, young couple, expecting their first kid, sent a thank you note. Just a handwritten card in an envelope with no return address. Said they appreciated how I'd fixed their heater personally when the repair guy was booked out. That it meant more than I knew. It was the kind of thing my own family had never said. The kind of thing that made me pause, set the card on my kitchen table, and just breathe. It's a strange thing, realizing strangers see your worth more clearly than your blood ever did. But it was also the first time in years I felt okay with that. I used to flinch when people said, family is everything. Not because I didn't want it to be true, God knows I did, but because I knew it hadn't been true for me in a long time. Maybe never. My father used to say that land makes a man. Not the kind of land you inherit, but the kind you work with your hands. He said it like gospel. But he also never handed me a damn thing. Just expectations I was supposed to meet in silence. I never wanted revenge. That's not what this is. I just wanted clarity. I wanted to see the board clearly. Who was playing, who was bluffing, and who just kept taking chips from the pie like they'd earned them. Turns out, I had more chips than they thought. A few weeks after the failed second lawyer stunt, I started getting messages from extended family. Cousins I hadn't heard from since the Clinton administration. One of them, Darren, a guy who once left me stranded in Knoxville after promising a ride, messaged asking if I had room to invest in one of his flips. Said he'd heard I was doing well with real estate. He put a winking emoji at the end, like we were old pals. I didn't respond. Not out of pride, out of exhaustion. I wasn't interested in being everyone's backup plan, especially not for people who once wouldn't loan me jumper cables. But it reminded me just how far the narrative had stretched. Somehow, the family that never took my work seriously now saw me as someone to get in good with. Not a person, a resource. And that's when I made a decision. I called a meeting. At my office, I invited my parents, Mason, and no one else. Told them if they wanted to talk, they'd show up. No pleasantries. No explanations. Just a time and place. They came. All of them. Even Mason, wearing a blazer like he thought it might count as maturity. I had 3 folders ready, one for each of them. Inside were records, payments I'd made, property titles, dates, contracts, repair receipts. Everything. I didn't explain it. I just slid the folders across the desk, sat back, and let them open them. They read. Slowly. Then I said, calm as I've ever been, this is the last time I carry what isn't mine. My mother blinked fast, like maybe she was going to cry. My father didn't look up at all. Mason flipped pages like he didn't understand what he was seeing. Maybe he didn't. I told him the truth. That they'd made their choices. That I'd made mine. That I wished them well, and I meant it. But from now on, they'd walk on their own 2 feet. There wasn't yelling. No dramatics. Just the quiet sound of recognition. The shift that happens when people finally realize the bridge they've been walking on isn't there anymore. They left one by one. I didn't walk them out. I sat there in that small office in East Knoxville, staring at the empty chairs, thinking about how strange it is to give everything and then give nothing, and how both, in the right moment, can be love. 2 months passed before I stepped foot in the Lake Como house again. I didn't plan it. It was one of those strange Saturdays where you find yourself driving with no real destination, just moving to escape whatever's gnawing at your insides. The truck turned down that street like it remembered for me. I parked across the road again. Same spot. Same old mailbox with a crooked red flag I never fixed. The house looked still, like it was holding its breath. And I realized something. No one had moved in. Despite all that noise, all that righteous entitlement, Mason had never actually taken the keys. Never claimed it. Maybe he thought it would just happen, that eventually I'd cave. Or maybe, deep down, he knew it wasn't his. I reached in a glove box and pulled out the small brass key that still sat on my spare ring. The one with the faded green tag that said Como. I kept it out of habit, out of respect, out of stubbornness. I walked up the porch steps slow, like the boards might remember me. They did. One creaked under my left foot, always had. And when I slid that key into the lock, it turned. Smooth. No resistance. Like nothing had changed. Inside, the air smelled like dust and dried wood. No artificial air freshener. No leftover perfume. Just time. I walked through the rooms quietly. Touched the old oak banister. Ran my fingers along the windowsills where Grandma used to put tiny potted violets. In the kitchen, the faucet still dripped, slow, steady. I meant to fix that. Never did. There was no epiphany. No tearful moment of closure. Just a steady, quiet pulse of something older than anger. Belonging. This wasn't about ownership. It never had been. It was about connection. Memory. Roots that go deeper than paper. On the way out, I found myself standing in front of the hall closet. The one where Grandma used to keep her coats and leftover Christmas ribbon. I don't know what made me open it. Just instinct. Inside, on the top shelf, was a small metal box. I recognized it immediately. A little fireproof safe she kept for emergencies. I'd seen it once as a kid, when her brother passed and she had to handle some papers. I carried it to the kitchen, opened the combination with a number I didn't even realize I remembered. Inside were a few yellow documents, a brooch I'd seen her wear exactly once, and a handwritten letter. Folded 3 times. My name on the front. The handwriting was hers, unmistakably hers. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just sat there, holding it, in that kitchen that had raised 3 generations of broken, beautiful people. And I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time. Chosen. It took me 3 days to open that letter. I kept it on the table right next to my keys. Walked past it every morning like it might say something without being unfolded. It didn't. I wasn't scared of what it said. I was scared of what it might undo. There's a certain architecture to how you survive disappointment, like a house built out of quiet compromises. Every beam is a moment you swallowed instead of fought. Every wall is a boundary you let them move one too many times. And I was afraid that one letter in her handwriting might knock that whole thing down. But on the 3rd night, I poured a whiskey, turned off the TV, and sat at the kitchen table with nothing but the letter in my breath. It was short. 2 paragraphs. Maybe 6 or 7 sentences total. She wrote that she knew what the others didn't. What I'd carried. What I'd done without fanfare. She said Mason had charm, but I had character. And that charm fades. She said the house was always meant for the one who stayed behind and did the work. And if they questioned it someday, which she figured they would, I should remember that I wasn't given less love, just more responsibility. Because she trusted me more. There it was. That quiet, private confirmation I hadn't known I needed. The word she never said out loud, but left just in time. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Slid it into my desk drawer between some old receipts and an unused passport. A place for things that mean more than they look. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not Mason. Not my parents. Not the cousins who suddenly remembered my name. It wasn't for them. It was the one thing in this whole mess that was just for me. And in some strange way, it made everything else settle. Not heal. Not forgive. But settle. Like putting the final piece in a puzzle you didn't know had an end. After the letter, things didn't change overnight, but I did. I started walking more. Just walking. East Knoxville isn't the prettiest place on a map, but it's mine. There's an old church off Magnolia Avenue, the one with the crooked steeple and boarded-up windows. I started ending my walks there, sitting on the brick steps with a gas station coffee, letting my thoughts breathe. I didn't feel like a winner. That's the part no one tells you about getting your closure. It's not a trophy. It's a quiet room. Sometimes it's empty. Sometimes it echoes. But it's yours. I sold 2 of the older rental units that spring. The ones with constant plumbing issues and a smell that never left no matter how much bleach you poured down the drains. The money wasn't life-changing, but the relief was. I stopped answering texts from relatives who'd only started using my first name again after the lawyer incident. Blocked a few, not out of spite, but out of peace. I even took a real vacation. First one in almost a decade. Rented a cabin in Asheville for a week. No signal, no family, no favors. Just me and the sound of wind through trees that didn't need anything from me. And I started writing things down. Not for publishing, not for anyone else. Just for myself. Scraps of memory. Small stories. Regrets I carried around so long they felt like birthmarks. One afternoon, while cleaning out the storage unit I hadn't touched in years, I found a box labeled miscellaneous. Inside were tools from my first job, old receipts from when I tried to start a landscaping company in my 20s, and a photo I'd forgotten existed. It was of me and Grandma on that same porch at Lake Como. She had one hand on my shoulder, and I wasn't smiling, but I looked steady, solid, like someone who knew how to hold weight without dropping it. I kept that photo, put it on my desk at the office, right next to the framed LLC certificate for Como Holdings. Some people decorate their lives with what they were given. I guess I'm learning how to decorate mine with what I had to build. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just signed that paper. Just leaned back in that Sunday dinner chair, nodded along while everyone smiled and clinked glasses, and handed Mason the house like it was a favor and not a theft. Would it have loved me more? Would it have made the years of quiet sacrifice suddenly worth something? But here's the thing I've learned, slowly and with great resistance. Being useful isn't the same as being valued. And being silent doesn't mean you're respected. For too long, I lived in that gap. And now I live somewhere else entirely. Still in Knoxville. Still fixing things. Still quiet, but not invisible. My office runs smoother. My phone rings less. The people in my life are fewer, but more real. Tenants who leave thank you notes. Friends who show up without asking. A neighbor who brings me sweet tea just because I helped her shovel the walk one icy morning. The house on Lake Como is still mine. I haven't sold it. I haven't moved in. It just is. A space I tend to now and then, repainting the porch swing, clearing the weeds, like a memory I'm not quite ready to leave but don't need to relive either. As for Mason, last I heard, he moved out west. Something about a startup. I don't keep tabs. I don't wish him harm. But I don't know him a soft place to land anymore. That ship has sailed, and I didn't wave. Every so often, I pull out Grandma's letter. Read the lines again. Let her voice, etched in ink, remind me that I was seen, even if it was only by one person. Sometimes, one is enough. You spend your youth trying to be someone they'll miss when you're gone. Then one day, if you're lucky, you realize the real victory is becoming someone you don't have to abandon to stay loved. So no, this isn't revenge. And it's not closure. It's just the edge of something honest. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to live past it.